We know that at some point in the history of our world, there was a great flood. We don't know if it was localized or regionalized or even global, but we do know that this event was catastrophic enough that nearly every ancient culture wrestled with its impact. This flood, whenever it was, however it occurred, resonated with the whole of humanity, and humanity, in addition to seeking a new beginning, sought to find meaning in the flood's destruction and fullness, and even in its grace. I don't have a whole lot of time this morning, and our lection is laser focused on the story's resolution, so that's where I'm going to invest the majority of my energy, but I do want to offer a quick disclaimer before I get started. I will tell you that I struggle with the theology of a good God, a loving God, who is so invested in creation that their only solution for saving creation is to wipe everything out and start all over again. I cannot and I will not proclaim the flood as verdict or judgment for humanity's shortcomings any more than I can proclaim the death of Jesus on a cross as payment for corporate sin. So I choose to read the flood recounts not as proclamation, nor historical summary, nor indisputable, ineffable theological tenet. But instead, I choose to read the flood recounts as a human attempt to explain those things we humans cannot fully explain. And I see these texts, and many like them, as invitations for each one of us to join in the process of offering our own human, our own incomplete, but no less authentic understandings of the universe and the one who created it. So, this week, as I discerned our text, I approached it as an invitation to consider and even offer my own flimsy takeaways regarding the difficult complexities of life. Let me say, I don't love how we got to God's covenant of promising never to flood the earth again. But there are some components in the retelling of this contractual agreement that I find helpful, even poignant. So here goes. I want you to remember 3 things this morning. 3 things. Everybody, everything, every time. Got that? Everybody, everything, every time. Let's start with everybody. Everybody, everybody, everybody. The text tells us that the world reset. Yes, God makes this promise of protection and new life to Noah's family, but guess what? Noah's family represents everybody. When God puts that rainbow in the sky, it's for everyone in every place on earth to see. This is the covenant of a global God, one in relationship with the whole of humanity. Everybody is created in God's image. It's no wonder that the rainbow and like images of color spectrum have been used as universal symbols of inclusion, affirmation, love, and value. Today's covenant, for all of its faults, is a covenant crafted for everybody. Okay, the second point, everything. Everything, everything, everything. They were co-conspirators, y'all, all of them. Those naughty oak trees allowed themselves to be felled and turned into habitats for the Nephilim, the sons of giants who managed to romance Adam's daughters. Those plotting mules and oxen, they allowed themselves to be compromised, complicit in the conspiracy. They lugged humanity's largest stones to make false idols. I also heard that the flamingos were running a numbers game. The zebras were known to charge outrageous interest rates, and the roosters, well, don't get me started on the roosters. They were just too loud in the mornings, and you can't keep disturbing the peace ad infinitum. Okay, so this might be one of the most ridiculous paragraphs I have ever composed, but I hope it begins to articulate an important point. The parts of creation excluding humanity, that's the plants and the vegetation and the creeping things and the flying things. These parts of creation were not, nor have they ever been, sinful. But despite their innocence, the floodwaters do not spare their numbers. This morning's covenant does two things to remind us of God's vastness. The covenant includes God's committed protection for the whole of creation, though admittedly the legislation could have been much, much stronger. God acknowledges the value of plants and animals and reminds humanity of its responsibility to be their stewards. The mention of plants and animals in this covenant is also a reminder of our place in an ecosystem. Human actions don't just have consequences for humanity, but they also have consequences for the whole of creation. That rainbow in the sky ought to remind us that everything is made in God's image, and we cannot live into God's intended calling for ourselves if that calling is not steeped in the well-being of our ecosystems. Okay, the third thing, every single time, y'all, every time, God resurrects, brings new life, keeps on recreating. Don't get me wrong, I really would have loved a clause in the covenant whereby, in addition to agreeing not to destroy the earth by flood, God would also agree not to wreak havoc in any other form of destruction covered by farmers' insurance or strange occurrences that Mr. Mayhem can conceive. But that rainbow, it sure is a powerful symbol of consistency, especially this week. Because I've seen the flooding and I've heard the thunder and I've seen the lightning and I've watched a little creek in our backyard move from swift trickle to violent current. In the middle of all this water, my mind drifts to 14 million Texans who don't have enough of it, not to mention homeless neighbors in our own backyard who spend their days seeking but a gallon or two. The very thing that quenches and sustains our earth can become more volatile than a hot stove in an instant. But somehow, some way, I keep on seeing rainbows. The covenant in our text isn't God's promise to eliminate chaos or catastrophe or heartache, but it is God's promise to be with us in every time of life. Everybody, everything, every time. Friends, as our Lenten season begins, we might be pondering if this global pandemic of ours is another iteration of an historical flood. I think where today's text can be valuable, if we choose to let it be, is that the text can point us away from the why of chaos and trauma and the complexities of our natural world. And I think instead, if we choose to let it, the text can point us in the direction of seeing each day, each coming season as an opportunity for renewal and rebirth. Friends, God has promised to be vested in everybody and everything and every time. And if we are to seize the rainbows in front of us, we must commit right now to forging a community where every time is the right time to live in ways that reflect a tangible love of everybody and everything God has created. Friends, may it be so. And may it begin today. Amen.